Why are United States business schools so highly rated? Well, I guess to answer this question, we have to look at what does it mean to be rated at all? Well, generally, a rating is just an opinion of others. So, who are some of the top rating agencies? Well, you have US News and World Reports, okay, a magazine. You have Forbes ratings, you have Princeton Review ratings, and you have quite a few others that put out their rankings in terms of where business schools in particular stand with regard to others. Now, what factors are they using? Well, unequivocally, the number one factor for ranking in that way, with all of these usually publications that are doing the ranking, is the opinion of existing researchers and educators about that institution. So they query professors, researchers, industry practitioners about their perception of a given institution. And there's some formula that they use. But number one factor is usually other researching professors, their opinions of another academic institution. Now, they'll factor in things like number of publications, importance of the publications, etc. So you can say that the ranking factors, number one, is the institution as a research institution. So always your research institutions are going to be ranked very highly on these business school lists. So how does that hurt a lot of other schools? Well, a lot of other schools aren't R1, as they call them, or top research universities. They may be focused primarily on teaching and they may have great teachers there. But when you look at the rankings, just understand you're not talking about the quality of the teaching, you're talking about the quality of the research. So what's another factor before we jump into? So if the research is the most important factor, we need to discuss that for a moment. But the other most important factor, because we said industry opinion comes in there as well, and normally that is gauged by employment rates. That is, they query employers and say, what do they believe is the most effective or best business school in terms of who you would prefer to hire from or you believe is producing the highest quality of candidates. And so with that being said, they query some of the top firms like your consulting firms like McKinsey or Bain or BCG, some of these others, or you're talking to the top finance firms that typically hire from business schools. That's why they focus on these types of industries. They look at the employment rates 3 months out of school. They look at the percentage of employment. They look at salary. They look at bonuses, things of that nature. And they examine the industries that individual schools, graduates go into as well. And you have some schools that specialize very hard, like Northwestern is known for its marketing, for example. So they take that into consideration as well. And that's why they sometimes rank programs at schools as well. So with that being said, that's another factor. And those are the main factors that go into how you get your school ranking. Now, how do they measure this whole research factor? And back to the original question of why are U.S. schools ranked so highly compared to other schools? Well, it comes down to publication in research journals. So anything that is submitted to a research journal for publication goes through the peer review process. And basically, it is submitted anonymously to various scholars in the field for examination and review. And usually it goes through multiple rounds of review, editing, requests for feedback, mandatory changes or things of that nature. And ultimately, the researcher or author is trying to produce a high quality product that the publication is willing to publish based upon the review of peers in their field. Now, the elite publications are more strenuous or strict on their review process, and generally they require extensive research with the use of analytical methods on vast data sets and things. So they focus very hard on this quantitative style of research. Now, to do that type of research, it requires collecting data. And that's where universities in the United States have somewhat of an advantage. We have universities that have large endowments, large resources dedicated for the research function. And so ultimately, they can pay professors higher wages because professors in the United States make more money than they do in other places in the world. And they can dedicate additional funds to these research projects. If you ever look on a business school's website and you see professor listings, the chaired professors, if you will, these are positions that their salary is largely funded by donations to the school. And the objective of these donations is to fund a researcher to come in and do their research at this school, because ultimately it builds up the school. Now, this researcher may not primarily focus on teaching. They may never teach, as a matter of fact. Lots of times at your big R1 universities, your professors who have these research endowments will not teach classes at all. Or if they do, they'll buy out their classes, or they'll have research assistants who do the majority of the teaching. So the answer really to the question is the United States is able to attract top researchers, not necessarily from the United States, throughout the world to come to the United States to do their research at these universities, because these universities have the resources that allow them to conduct research that will get into or be published in these top research journals. And so now that we understand how this system works, the question becomes, do we have a misunderstanding of what it means to have a good business school or to attend a good business school? Well, just because those resources are dedicated to research, how does that actually translate down to the classroom, particularly when these researchers are not the ones doing the majority of the teaching? Now, you could argue that if they have resources to dedicate towards the research, they also have resources dedicated to hire very good teachers or industry professionals, usually, to instruct the courses and ultimately to deliver education. Or they could argue that because their research prowess is so high, that the quality of the student that they can accept goes up, up, up. And that's true. If you take a elite university with a very strong research department, very well endowed, like many of the Ivy League institutions, because the reputation of the school is such, the highest performing high school students across the nation oftentimes apply to these schools, and thus the school can be very selective and only let in individuals who are likely to be successful in the future. Now, we do know that some individuals get in because, well, there are inclusion programs, there are people who are rich and legacy programs, people who became famous early on in life, and they get in as well. But by and large, still, the acceptance standards at these universities is extremely high across the board, even for these individuals that get in not just on their academic performance, say in high school, for example. So regardless, they can be more selective in the students that come through. And ultimately, if the opinion of employers about these students is higher, then all of a sudden that element of employer sentiment towards the university is going to grow as well. So there's kind of the complete circle. So to answer the question of why they're ranked so highly, well, it comes back to resources and how resources relate to research and how research relates to industry placement, and the cycle continues. But the question of, can you get an amazing education, an education that's quite frankly just as good as an education you would get at any other school, at schools that are not ranked highly? Well, my argument would probably be yes. Your ability to learn is based upon the amount of effort that you put in, because information is not the differentiating factor or competitive advantage anymore. We all have access to infinite amounts of information. The differentiating factor is our willingness to ingest that information, to learn the theory and history behind it so that we can better understand that information, to look at new models of using or processing that information, to ask the hard questions of, are these models the appropriate models? Are there new or different ways that we can use or process this information for the intended result that we desire? For our awareness of other people's points of views and how that factors into the processing of information. All of these things that go into what is education, all of that's really on you. And it comes down to your exposure to discussions like this, your exposure to different points of view such that it can start to increase or augment your ability to process information, your empathy or increased understanding of the emotional elements of how others act in a given scenario and why they act that way, your appreciation of your individual biases, if you will, but better said, influences or heuristics that affect the way you see things or the reason you have a given opinion. All of this relates to what is education, but ultimately contributes to our discussion right now of what is education, what is a good education, and gets to the heart of the matter of why are business schools in the United States ranked highly. So if you have opinions on this, please jump into the column down below. Love to hear them. Jump into the forums on thebusinessprofessor.com. But regardless, I hope to see you around the platform sometime soon. Until then, take care.